to order, and hopefully he'll pop on. So I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. Thanks again, Jen.
Thanks. I'll see you at 9:50.
Okay, great. We, as Jen mentioned, we have 50 minutes. We need to end promptly at 10 to 10. So we will be able to take a pass at the heritage tree piece here, but I'm sure we'll be returning to it. I don't believe we have any public comment. I don't see anyone else on. Great. So we'll go ahead to our discussion items of heritage trees. First, I just want to thank everybody for the work they've been doing individually and in getting and together in getting the materials to where they are right now. I'd like to maybe divide up the time today, recognizing we probably won't get to a final version of things, but if we could spend approximately 15 minutes or so, just start parsing it out that way so that we can address each of these areas, the criteria, the ordinance, and the nomination form, so we can have some discussion about each of those and then identify what we need to come back to and kind of where we want to go from here. Does that seem like a good way to use our time?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. So let's start with the criteria that I think is going to guide both what we end up including just to finalize the nomination form, and it'll probably inform the ordinance piece also. And since Bob isn't here yet, let's start with the criteria. Thanks to Les and Betty for this work on this, and the citation for the material we have here on criteria is an article that Les and Betty have reviewed. I'm going to turn it over to you guys in just a quick second, but that's actually, I don't have it right in front of me, but it's an article from, was it University of Hawaii?
Yes, it was.
There it is. Okay. Yeah, University of Hawaii on establishing core criteria for the protection of heritage trees. And so we'll also have that citation if anybody wants that. It's a 2019 article, so thanks for that. Each of these categories, it looks like you guys gave us a good synopsis of the article there. And I want to see if there's anything you guys want to add, and then I have some questions and other folks might have some questions too, but just turn it over to Les and Betty.
Okay.
Would you like to go first, Betty?
Sure. I'll just say a few words. We just put in, out of the 16, we put in these, well, there's 6 different, wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 different categories here that each one of them had issues. If you read the little paragraphs, you could see how the committees got together and reviewed it and had different rounds of voting on what the criteria should be. So these are the ones we picked that we thought were the most universal. And so if you've read over it, we can discuss what you folks think about it too.
Great. Les, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, well, I just would go on and say that when Betty and I sat down, we did try to, we looked at the form that had been provided, the Lake Oswego form, and tried, and I don't think there was any inconsistency between what the criteria on that form plus what we came up with. I just liked a little more detail on exactly what we thought constituted a heritage tree, and for that reason we liked the verbiage and this verbiage that you see came directly out of that paper. It was actually a master's thesis, actually, but and we would probably, if we choose to use that, want to wordsmith it a bit to make it more appropriate for general consumption. But Betty and I didn't do that.
Okay, yeah, and what this appears to me to be is as a synopsis of the work that this was done in this paper by these groups. I think when we get to our criteria, what we're going to want to do is identify specifically what are our criteria. So I think it'll be less a discussion of what was looked at and more us teasing out what are the things that we want to consider of historical value, for example, or how are we going to frame the criteria for cultural value? Because people who want to nominate a tree, I think, are going to need to know the specifics that that account for that for the Cannon Beach Heritage Tree Program. So I think that's what we're looking to do here. And I think that's a great starting point.
Yeah, I thought it was important to show what other people thought, because when I saw the Lake Oswego one, it said size and age, and I didn't think anything about that until I read this synopsis, and I thought, oh, there could be issues with that for cost and other issues. So I thought it would be important for everybody to see what the discussions were, so we have a more informed outlook.
Yeah, I think this really helps us think about the different things. You could have a very slow growing tree that is not very large, by comparison to a faster growing tree, but it could be very, very, very old and significant. So that's an example of how that variation. I just want to open it up to the other committee members here. Let's kind of take a first pass and then see if we can start teasing out some of the criteria, or maybe folks have thoughts on that at this point. Maybe we can just go around in the interest of time. So Barb, could I go to you?
Sure. I don't know if I have anything to comment about. I liked all of the writing. I think, and even though there's a lot of reading, I think if somebody's going to want to nominate a tree, they need to be informed, and this is very good information.
Okay, great. Stacy?
I agree. I just think it could be a little less wordy.
Yeah.
A little easier for people to read, but I thought the information was very good.
Yeah, and again, what this appears to me to be is a discussion, but for example, it says 5 criteria reached high consensus, but we don't see what those criteria are. So I think our next step would be to identify or to parse out what were the specific criteria, because if someone's nominating here, you can see they considered these things, but it's not saying as Cannon Beach, these are the things that we've identified as historical value. So that clarifying that this is a different discussion than actually providing people with the criteria. And I think we need to take that step to be clear. Bob, did you have anything here on first pass with this?
Not very much. I had read, may have been as many as a dozen cities material, their conditions and applications and so forth. And had my feeling was that what I would like to see is something that is pretty easy to nominate and get approved, but doesn't carry a lot of weight. And I think that was not the weight of the consensus of the group. And so it was like, okay, I'm comfortable. I don't feel a need for that to be for us to go along the lines I had laid out, but I can go along and make a contribution as it comes up. But I apologize for being late. I knew we were having this meeting and I had it in my mind up until the last few minutes. I'm probably going to have to go upstairs and get my materials, but it shouldn't take longer than a minute at some point.
Okay, great. And Bob, because you weren't here at the beginning, the way we're going to parse this out, we have a limited amount of time. We need to end at 10 to 10. So we're talking about the criteria now.
Good.
Then we're going to talk about the ordinance piece and then the nomination form. So we're just focusing on the piece that Betty and Les have provided here. Does that make sense? That distinction between this discussion, what we have here is it's saying what they talked about. But for example, if I wanted to nominate a tree and I looked at this, I wouldn't be able to evaluate what is it that I need to have in this tree to meet these criteria. So I think we need to know what constitutes historical value, what constitutes, and in each of these discussions, I think very often they said it would be up to the local heritage tree program to decide what those determinations were. These are things they considered, but they didn't lay it out. So I think we need to identify our criteria here if we're going to include it, so people clearly know what it is that they are looking for. And then do we need to meet all of the criteria? Does it need to meet some of the criteria? So I think there's a next pass that we need of specificity that we need to get to. So thoughts on that?
One of my thoughts is, especially on the age and how much it costs to get the age verified. I just think that we should discuss what also the cost to the property owner or the city. So I think that when we choose these criteria, we have to be very careful about costs we might be adding on to the people that are either have it on their property or the city. So those are things that when the age, the cost of the age came up, I was thinking, oh, this could be a problem for some people. So some groups, and I don't know if it's a problem for Cannon Beach, but anyway, that's what I was thinking. So that's,
Yeah.
I just wanted to know what the group thought about that.
I don't know whether this had come up, but it seems to me that for most trees that might be considered, if we can identify, obviously not in the rules, but in fact, maybe the tree committee could identify people who have lived in the town for a long time and would remember trees. I know we have a tree in our yard, for example, that's taller than our two-story house, and one of our neighbors says she remembers when it was planted. And so I would suspect that that would be true if it was a sufficiently noteworthy tree, that there might well be people who could say, oh, I remember I was 6 years old, or something like that.
Yeah.
Which would not be expensive.
Yeah, so one
Right.
question is, what will be our sources for determining? And they may not all, right, it may not all just be relying on that, but that could be a supplemental source of information, as if it's a readily recognized by people who've been here for a long time. That could supplement any other information. And something like age, I think depending on the size of the program, some places may be more equipped to make a scientific determination of age, and others it may be more, this tree has been here as long as anyone can remember, and it has significant value for a variety of reasons. So other thoughts on our next steps with the criteria?
Well, so the way I thought about it was responding to a comment you made a little while ago, Jelaine. I don't think a heritage tree has to have all of the criteria. I think any one of the criteria is sufficient to at least be nominated. Age wasn't really that big of a deal in the way I was thinking in my reading, partly because the older the tree, the less remaining life that it has. And so you get on this slippery slope if you really focus on age. I think cultural significance is more important, or maybe unique botany, a unique tree for the area maybe would be more important. But there was some talk about, and maybe when we talk about what does it mean to have a heritage tree, we may want to think about the older the tree, the less time it's going to have, and potentially the more care it's going to require. Anyway, I just don't think age is going to be a really good criteria unless it's somebody really remembers that tree and it becomes special for that reason.
Okay, great. Well, and I think actually, let me pause here. Do we have a consensus that any one of these criteria, once we establish with some specificity that any one of these would be sufficient for someone to nominate a tree?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
great. So we can we can start there. I think that's great. And yeah, age may be one of them, but there are certainly others. And depending on the species, as I said, you could have a very slow growing tree that doesn't have a huge presence physically, but then, size, some of our very, very large trees are important and will be important to protect. So we have a couple, 3 minutes left on this topic. I'd like to identify, with a logical next step then be to take each of these historical, cultural, botanical, each of these categories and start to identify the specifics. And if that paper that you guys wrote, or if we see in other municipalities, the kind of bullet point, the specific criteria for that, could we make that our next task with criteria? So we're teasing this out.
Yes.
Okay, great. And I just want to ask Jan, if you have relevant information to criteria or examples you think would be useful for us, can you get that to us so we can be considering that? I don't know if you have any comment there too.
Sure. And you have a meeting on Thursday?
We have a meeting on Thursday, and then I think, as I said, this is going to be an ongoing process as we're honing in. I think any given meeting we're limited in time. So yeah, we'll be touching on it again Thursday, but this won't be our last discussion. We're going to need to keep working through it. Great. Okay. So we'll be looking at each of these, unless, and Betty, if that article had specific criteria, maybe you can bring that to us. I don't think we can get it in the packet for Thursday, but we can certainly discuss it and kind of continue the conversation Thursday on this.
Okay.
Maybe set a next work session. Anything else on criteria that anyone wants to add at this moment?
No.
Nope.
Nope.
Okay. So let's take a look at the ordinance here. I included, Bob has done an initial kind of bones of some of the elements that we may want to consider. We haven't talked as a group specifically, and so I think some of these pieces we're going to need to discuss because we hadn't come to any decision on them. And then I also included the example from Portland, as it's fairly succinct, and I think it addresses several of the questions that that have come up as we're thinking about this, and I think takes an approach, at least personally, that I think makes sense. Just as a kind of introduction, I would just say that I think if we are going to have an ordinance protecting heritage trees, that it should have some teeth. The point being, if you go through the process of nominating a tree and having it designated and having the arborist look at it and all of this, it's really with the intention that this designation is going to stick. And it means something to protect this tree. So I think having the option of just removing the designation at the whim of an owner, if the property owner changes, I think that's something we really want to consider. So that's the thing that jumped out at me here. But I want to, again, open it up and see if folks have specific thoughts, either related to the initial draft we have here and or what we see in the Portland one, or any other ordinances that people have maybe taken a look at. And again, let's just go around in the interest of time here, so we make sure everybody gets a time in on this. And Bob, I think you spoke to this a little when you first got on, saying that you had kind of done this as a starting place. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
Not at the moment, thank you.
Okay, great, thanks. And thanks for getting us started with this. Anyone want to jump in, or we can kind of go around again, whatever makes most sense.
I felt that I agree with you, Jolene, about the delisting. I feel like it should be really onerous for somebody if they want to take it off. And unless it's health, I don't really see any reason why it should be taken off of the Heritage Tree Program designation. So that stuck out for me also. There was another point, but I'll have to think about it, what it was. So go ahead and get somebody else to talk first, and then I'll
Okay. Thanks.
remember what I was going to say.
We'll come back around. Okay.
Thank you.
Anyone in the room there want to?
Yeah, I'd like to have a discussion about it being on the property deed. Because I think if it's on your property and you agree to it, that's great. But if you sell it, then I think the new owner needs to give permission rather than just having it in the deed. I think some people might be not happy about having to accept that. I think it should be a discussion with the owner.
I agree.
Yeah, these are two very different approaches. So on one end of the spectrum is kind of, a very light hand where you just say, I want to delist this. On the other end is it's on the deed and it's really protecting this tree. And people understand that that's going to carry over with the property. So those are kind of ends of the spectrum. Yeah, Barb, did you want to?
That was actually my second point.
Mhm.
I'm sorry. That was actually my second point. Was I do think it should be listed on the deed, because I have seen in my life, I've seen a property that had all these beautiful trees. Only one was a heritage tree. And when the property was sold, everything was cut except for the heritage tree. And all those trees were valuable, but at least one was saved. And the way that things are going in Cannon Beach, it just seems like the people that are moving in are just cutting down trees. And so I think we're doing this to protect trees. So I think we should think really strongly about this point, because I don't know, if you buy a property with a heritage tree, that probably makes the property more valuable in some sense. So
Yeah.
Anyway, that's my point of view.
I think there's sense in that it goes against my draft, but that's fine with me. If the point is to preserve the tree rather than just to acknowledge it and call people's attention to it, then and if it's clear to the property owner, then they're taking that on as one of the characteristics of their property, and that for better and for worse, then it on one side limits and maybe another side enlarges the population of who might buy the property. But it becomes like I don't know, like as though there were a stream going through it or something like that. That's gonna be part of what you get.
Yeah. Yeah. Other thoughts of anybody who hasn't spoken yet to this piece? Specific to the listing, or, it probably doesn't come as a surprise. I agree. I think that having it listed on the deed, it is a communication about the intention of what this ordinance is. And it also is a communication about our seriousness in protecting our trees. And if something is designated as a heritage tree, I think, property changes hands a lot. And if someone comes in and buys a property and says, yeah, well, it's inconvenient for me to have this, so I'm going to delist it. Or if it doesn't carry over with the deed, I think it undermines the intent of having the heritage trees. For me personally, and I would need to think about this more, but I think what it might result in, at least initially, is we maybe have fewer heritage trees designated on private property, but the ones that are designated will actually be protected. I don't know if would be a result or not, but that's my feeling. And we can certainly talk about this more. I'm sure it's a complicated issue, but it sounds like we have kind of a range of feeling on the committee about that piece. In terms of I'm just looking for my time frame here. In terms of the laying it out, does the Portland I noticed, just the way they parse things out with the letters and the layout. Do we like that? And does that seem clarifying for folks in terms of how we want to lay out the ordinance? And does each of these A through G, oh no, it goes over to the A through H, does that address each of the categories that we want to be sure we're speaking to in our ordinance? We can talk about the content of each one, but does the Portland ordinance cover the territory in terms of the things we need to address in the ordinance? Does that make sense?
I think it does, and it's clear, it's easy to read. I mean, it's, it's not, you don't have to go searching for something. It's really easily laid out.
Yeah, and I would agree. I like the way that it lays it out. Seems very straightforward.
Okay, great.
Yes, I agree with that.
Okay, and so I think what we have in the body of the draft, we can just parse out and lay it out in terms of these lettered sections, and that it will cover each of the things we need to identify. I think one of the things that I appreciated about the Portland ordinance is that they both, they get into some specificity, but it's pretty brief. But it helps people to identify, again, nuisance trees, just noting that there's some clarification about the process where it says Urban Forestry Commission. In the case of Portland, that I think would be the tree board in our case, so we can make substitutions as we need to here. I think on E, one question I had, if we adopt this, or if we go this route, would be, it says at the last sentence, the city council may remove the designation if it finds the designation is no longer appropriate. I think would want to think a little bit about what's the process to do that, and what would be some of the criteria for no longer appropriate. So that's one place I think we'd want to look at a bit more. Certainly the question of private trees versus public property trees. I'm looking at our time here. And then I think also on H, it also does give a little bit of direction in terms of the role of the city forester, how the city might support private owners in terms of some of that work. We can look at that in more specificity. And then it also does account for emergencies. If a tree is a danger, if there's some action that needs to be taken to, in terms of public safety, that there's a provision for that, and some specificity there. So I think those are all important elements that that I appreciated in this, that I think we could also add in. Any other? Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is our city arborist the person that would be making those? Is that, in Cannon Beach, would that be our city forester? Is the arborist that works with that's under contract with the city?
Yeah, that's a good question. That was my thought when I read it, but I don't think we've specified that, and that's probably a good question.
We probably need to ask the city,
Right.
But I'm suspecting that it would be somebody more like a Trevor, because our arborist is a contract.
Right.
So it may, for Cannon Beach, it may be somebody that's actually part of the city that then, but it would be the arborist that would do these things at their
Right.
direction.
Right.
Well, I would want someone with expertise in the trees and in understanding the health of the tree. And I think someone with that expertise would be important to have in that role of determining whether something is a threat, unless it's just like an obvious threat. That's what I kind of liked about the 1 and 2 under emergencies. The first one says that the person with the expertise would be making that determination in an emergency, and that if that person with the expertise is unavailable, action could be taken to remediate the immediate risk without removing the tree entirely. So we can maybe come back and look at those two, but I felt like it gave a couple of layers of intervention there if something was looking hazardous. But I think it's important to have somebody with expertise making that determination. Like arborist, in terms of the health of the tree. Or maybe in conjunction or in conjunction with city staff.
I don't think I know anybody on the city staff who has declared that they have expertise in trees. I think the person that you would expect to be closest to that is Kirk, and I think that they all defer to the arborists.
And I think because the arborist makes those determinations in terms of which trees are going to be removed as hazard trees already in those cases, I think that, and then he gives that report to staff, and then staff moves forward with that. I think that would, we kind of have a pathway established for that. So I want to maybe pause here on the ordinance, but if I'm understanding, we agree that this format and layout and speaking to each of these elements is going to be important. We've identified a couple of areas where we maybe have a range of opinion, and we'll want to come back and have some more focused discussion. Is there anything anyone wants to add or kind of put a pin in on the ordinance before we move on?
Just like to raise a thought, and it's really what Bob said earlier about what is the purpose of the Heritage Tree Program in Cannon Beach? Because I think he made a clear distinction. If it's just to recognize the trees, it implies one thing. If it's designed to protect or to somehow, shelter the trees we value, then that is something else. And I don't know really that we've ever said what was the ultimate purpose of the program. I'm sure it varies from community to community.
Yeah, well, that's a very good point, because that will guide all the subsequent pieces.
Well, it gets to the deed question, or are they heritage in perpetuity? I was uncomfortable with that, but I was thinking, if I think about this as a wetland identified in the city, then I happen to have one. I've clearly got rules of things I can and can't do. Maybe a heritage tree is more like a wetland designation. It becomes special. I just hadn't thought about it that way before, but anyway, I'd be curious what we as a group want to do.
Yeah, and maybe that's a kind of a fundamental place to start. I noted that the Portland ordinance just starts with the description, Bob's, initial brief statement saying trees are important to Cannon Beach, and maybe under purpose, that's where we really specify what that is. And I think that deserves a consideration and more discussion, and we can perhaps get some other input on that too. We can talk about how we want to move forward with that maybe on Thursday. Okay. So then we have the nomination form, which Stacy and Barb did an initial draft of, and Les and Betty also kind of reformatted that into a like a form that I think the format is nice and could be incorporated. And I apologize because I forgot when I was talking with Les earlier about being able to show that to everybody today, but I forgot that Kelsey wasn't going to be here, so she can't actually put it up on the screen. But I think we can look at that on either Thursday. But it's essentially taking the information that we have from the draft from Stacy and Barb, and then formatting that a little differently. But let's kind of go through this draft, because I don't think we've spoken about it in detail, and see if there's discussion on the elements here, and make sure that we've got everything that we want to include on a nomination form or an application form here. So I'm going to just open it up and get folks' thoughts on this. And again, if we can just kind of move around so everyone gets a chance to have input, that would be great. We got about 10 minutes left on our meeting. Oh, no, we got about 15. Yeah, okay. So thoughts on the nomination form?
Well, I mean, I think this form is clearly, it's important that if it is on private property, that we get the signed permission of the owner, and I thought that was very good, the way that this form handled it.
Yeah, and we may want to, I think right at the bottom of the first page, it says, is the tree on public or private property? Maybe we move that item up a little bit, just so that's a little, maybe we link that to the property owner approval if it's a private property tree, but that's more just a layout question here. Are all of the different determinants here clear for folks? Do we feel like this gives a description of how people could arrive at these different elements?
I thought it was very well laid out and covered all the aspects. So well done, really well done.
They spent a lot of, well, there's a fair amount of the document that talks about specifics on how to measure the tree. And I liked that part of it, but some of the other ones I thought were a little bit less, or a little, was harder to tell exactly what you were supposed to do. And some things you couldn't do, like please describe the health of the tree. Well, that's going to be somebody, an arborist that does that, I think.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
it could be that this form was used and several people filled out their own respective parts of it. I don't know that, but.
So if the nomination form, if I'm understanding, this is what a citizen or a group could, this would be the initial, we think this tree is important and would like to submit it for consideration. Right? So one question I have is, at some point in the process, the health of the tree is going to need to get determined by an arborist. I think that was included as one of the things in the criteria that was considered. So we'll want to talk more about if that's something we want to include as a matter of course. If a tree is nominated, does it get evaluated by the arborist? And then how does that get folded into the process? If so, when does that happen? And or, I mean, at some point we think that the health of the tree might need to be considered. I think it's just a question of when and how we go about that. Is that accurate? Am I understanding folks' thoughts on that?
I believe so.
Yeah.
And I don't know, Barb and Stacy, did you have a thought about that piece about the health of the tree? In terms of where you would envision that happening, or how, as you guys were talking about the nomination form?
Not really. I mean, we borrowed this from Lake Oswego, and but I do think that the individual applicant is not going to be able to determine the health of the tree. So I would take it out. I think I would take it out of the application and maybe have a separate form that the arborist fills out.
Okay. And actually, as I go back and I'm thinking about the ordinance, I think that Portland ordinance, I'll have to go back and look at this, but I think in one of those sections when it says designation, anyway, that might be a place that we could include kind of what's the sequence of steps that people go through. And so if a tree is nominated, then at some point the arborist would look at it to determine that it's healthy, et cetera. And so we could see where that would fit. So we might take that out. Is your agreement on that we would remove the health of the tree aspect on the nominating form and then include that as a subsequent layer?
It would be a step in the process, but not on the form.
Not in the nomination form. So I'm seeing heads nodding on that. Is that?
Yes.
Anyone?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll include that later.
I know there was some concern from the city side as to the costs that they would bear to support the program. maybe limiting the number of heritage trees in a given year or whatever, because that would be an expense to the city to have the arborist go check out a tree. We just need to keep that in mind. I think that's also part of the process. They'll want to be budgeting for that.
Yeah.
I
And-
think we should inquire about that, because I have the impression that the arborist goes and gives opinions on probably several trees a month in the normal course of things, because we see paperwork on trees that have been removed or are going to be removed that I think regularly arborists have been called, the arborist has been called to render an opinion. So maybe we ought to get an impression from either from the council or from the city government, from the city employees, how big a deal that is.
Trevor mentioned last time that he needs to be able to include it in his budget. And so he wanted to just have maybe 1 or 2 trees a year because it's an added expense for them. And he wanted to not have a ton of different visits that the arborist had to make. He wanted to limit it, especially in the beginning, and include it in his budget.
And I thought we agreed we're going to go with 2 trees.
Right, but that,
I think so.
so my question there is, we may end up designating 2 trees a year, but more than 2 may be nominated.
Right.
And so I think we're talking about because at the nomination layer, it's, if someone nominates a tree, let's say we have 5 nominated, those 5 would need to be evaluated, and then perhaps 2 of those would be designated. See what I'm saying? The difference between nominating and designating.
Yeah.
And the evaluation of the tree would come between the nomination and the designation somewhere. So we need to consider the cost of the evaluation. It occurs to me, it might be great to have the city arborist. I wonder if the city arborist would be available to come to to a work session on this. I don't know, what's involved, or maybe we could, just pose the question and get some feedback on what's evaluated or what is involved in evaluating the health of a tree in this context, which may be different than evaluating, hazard or, evaluate. I don't know if that evaluation is different, but it would be great to know what would go into this kind of evaluation for a heritage tree program.
Also, it seems to me that if you're getting an arborist involved about a particular tree, we might very well put in, is this an iconic example of a tree that is, historically prevalent in the area, and other kinds of considerations that may enter into, as well as the health.
Yeah, the arborist may at least be able to give a range in terms of age also as an example. They could, may not be exact, but could give some input on that. So if I'm understanding, just quickly going down, the last item on the nomination form is attach a photo of the tree. And I think that's a great idea if we can
It's a good idea.
include that, or if possible, do we want to make that a requirement or?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. So we'll get a picture of it. We will include the evaluation of the tree's health for a later step. We'll talk in more detail about where that would come. And then maybe on Thursday, we can loop back around if there are specific questions that we would, or information that we'd like to get from the arborist, and or if he's available to maybe come and speak to us briefly, whatever would work for his schedule. But let's be thinking about the information that we'd like specific to that, so that we can keep refining our process here.
And especially since we're doing it by Zoom, it wouldn't even be a matter of him getting there,
Right.
going and
Yeah.
coming.
Yeah, he might be able to pop in. So it is 9:46. I know this was a kind of a whirlwind tour of the materials we have so far. I think, what I realized was I'll sometimes I have an acute awareness of our time limitations in our meetings and the amount that we're trying to accomplish. So, I think if we know that we're making progress with each pass and we continue working on this on Thursday, I'd also like to include what it is that we would like to report to council. Right now, we're on their agenda for December, specific to heritage trees, and we can see if we're at a point that we want to give them an update or if we need to get a little further down the road before we do that. So please be thinking about that between now and Thursday. We have just 3 minutes left. Do we have anything for good of the order? I had one thing, and this is again just a consideration for future going forward. I am just again really aware that our committee, as I'm sure all the committees, we have lots of work and lots of items that we're always trying to get through, and we are very limited in our time. To me, it sometimes feels unfeasible trying to do so much of this work in an hour a month. Or even 2. But I just wanted to, for consideration, does it make sense for our committee to request or to schedule? I think we can actually schedule them as long as there's availability to record them. Regular work sessions, to have those on the calendar, perhaps not every month, but be thinking if you think this would help us move our work along, if we are not trying to schedule work sessions on a piecemeal basis, depending on what's on the docket that month. But if we know we've got a work session coming up on a certain date, we can both schedule for it and plan for it and incorporate that into the flow of our work. I think that would be helpful, but I wanted to just put that out, go to the order in terms of things we might consider for time going forward. Anything else for good of the order?
Bob, I'll defer to you, but I believe there's a coastal council meeting this afternoon.
There is.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That
5 o'clock.
yeah, 5 o'clock. Yeah.
At 5 o'clock?
Yeah, it's a Zoom meeting, I think.
Of course.
And,
Yes.
very interesting conversation. I enjoyed attending.
Thank you.
Great. Where could we get the information for that login for folks?
Good question. I don't think we have time before this meeting's going to be over for me to look and see.
It's in our email. It's in the
Can
email.
It's in the it's in it. Okay.
It's in an email. Could we just forward the email to you, Jelaine, and then you could make it available to the members?
Actually, I wouldn't be able to do
I'll
that
tell
because
you
I don't
about
have a staff. I don't have staff
Right.
support specific today, but I think we've got the word out, and maybe folks could individually contact one of the folks who may know.
I will make sure that I've got it where I can lay hands on it very quickly and forward it to anybody that wants to know. Thank
Okay,
you.
great. Yeah, thank you. Okay,
And
we are at
thanks,
9:50. Thank you all so much for all the work you've been doing and for moving through this with alacrity. And Jan, I would just say in listening to this, if there's information or anything that you would like the committee to have from the work Friends of the Trees are doing, please feel free to send that and we can weave that in. So I will once again say thanks to everybody, and we are adjourned. And if one of you folks who's in the council chamber could let Rusty know to come and turn the recording off, that would be great.
He's here.
Okay, good. All right. Thanks to everybody.
Thank
We
you.
are adjourned.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
All right.
Next.
Perfect timing.
Next is right.